Hey there, listener. Welcome to the Deep Share Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rouse, and for the last couple of decades, I've slowly been opening my eyes to a very different world than the one I grew up hearing about. And the more conversations I have with interesting people, the more mystifying this world becomes. So without further ado, let's get deep.
We've got science to celebrate! Demons bliss now! After what, baby? Come on!
There is rebellion in the wind. It will crush.
Everything I've said is true. It's real.
Dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith.
A damn lie. I saw them with my own eye.
Did IQs just drop sharply while I was away?
We did illusions, man! None of it is true!
I'm not insane.
This is mass madness, you maniacs! In God's name, you people are the real thing! We are the illusion!
Welcome back to the Deep Share Podcast. So I've been doing this for almost a year now, and these guys I've been listening to for years, and they inspired the hell out of me to do something like this. I love their approach. I love what they do. Please welcome Kyle and Russ from the Snake Bros.
What's up, man? Thanks for having
Brothers of the Serpent Podcast, to be official.
That's right. Snake Bros is the nickname, you know.
Yeah.
Brothers of the Serpent is the official name. That's how you find it.
Yeah. So how you guys doing?
Doing great.
Yeah, man. Really good.
Yeah. Glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us on the show.
Thanks for being here, man. So let's give my audience a little background for those who aren't familiar. What was the spark that got your podcast started, and how did you guys get into it?
You want to tell a story? We tell different stories. Do we tell different stories?
Probably.
I've heard different variations throughout time.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, it was, I started listening to podcasts about mysterious things. Well, first I started researching, just reading online about various ancient mysteries. And then, of course, Ancient Aliens comes along, and then that was fascinating to watch because
he's showing up at work every day going, Ancient Aliens!
Yeah.
And he keeps
like,
doing stuff, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean?
Sounds like me at every family gathering.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, I need to ask before what's your policy on swearing on this show? Because
Go ahead.
Okay. We'll try to keep the F-bombs down, but now, yeah. So I started looking into that stuff, and then I was looking, doing searches on various things, and podcasts kept coming up. But I kept getting hits for Mysterious Universe, and they've been doing this for forever, right?
Oh yeah.
And I was reading the articles on their website, and I was like, this is a great website, but what are these posts here with the audio files? And I eventually listened to one. I was like, okay, this is amazing. I think the first one I listened to was about the Black Knight satellite, and I was like, this is awesome. So I started listening to Mysterious Universe, and then they led me into, as I listened to them, I learned about a bunch of other shows. That's how I got introduced to Skeptico, and probably Where Did the Road Go, and definitely Grimerica, and just a bunch of other podcasts, and I would always look for their ancient mystery stuff. And I started getting really fascinated with Soraya from Where Did the Road Go, started inviting other podcasters on and having roundtables.
Hell yeah.
And I was like, dude, and at this point it had been, I don't know, it's been years and years. And Kyle and I were basically having these kinds of discussions at work or when we're hanging out down here. And I was like, we need to get in on this, on these discussions. We've been doing all this research. We've been reading all these books. We've been listening to all this stuff. And I was like, we can add to this conversation. We need to be a part of it. So I was like, we should just start our own show. We already have the studio because Kyle's into music. We're both into music, but he's got a studio with all the equipment already, and he's got the the audio engineering skills. It's a bit different recording a 2.5-hour show as opposed to like a 7-minute song. I think the first time we did it, we're like, is this even going to work? Like, is this going to be able to record for 2 hours and be okay?
Yeah, I was afraid the thing was just going to stop.
Yeah.
But it didn't.
Yeah, it worked. So yeah, that was basically like one day Kyle was just like, all right, you know what? Let's go home and we'll just record one. And that's what we did. We went home and recorded it and immediately.
Yeah, I think you were showing me. I don't remember if you were showing me one or you were just telling me, you're like, damn it, man.
Yeah. Ska!
Like, these guys, they're getting these other podcasters on and they're all having conversations about this awesome stuff. Like, we need to start this now. And I'm like, all right, let's do it when we get home.
Yeah.
And he's like,
okay. So we came home, we recorded one, and we threw it in the trash.
That's right. First one goes in the trash.
Yes. The sacrifice.
That's right.
Well, we needed an ancient mystery. And so,
Yeah, that's right.
you know, there's the lost original sode.
That's right. That's right. It's still lost. People think they found it, but they haven't.
How interesting that you've built a newer podcast on top of that older mystery.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
How perfect.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit about you guys, obviously, just from listening to your show for so long, but just remind me and clear something up. It was one of you was always more into the alternative stuff than the other, or was it always both? Yeah, I thought Russ was always more.
I mean, he was
heavy
kind of a
into it.
standard model scriptard when it comes to physics. I was like off the rails coming up with crazy theories, but
We take turns being the alternative theory guy.
when it came to ancient civilizations and all that stuff, I had no idea about weird alternative theories. Like, I had my own ideas about, you know, at the time before I really got into researching a lot of ancient texts, it was biblical texts, right? And I thought, you know, I think probably a lot of people who grew up learning Old Testament stories may develop theories about possible symbols in these stories. I mean, the basic one is Adam and Eve and the serpent and the tree of knowledge and the tree of life and the flaming sword and all, you know, and you're just like, what is going on? And the apple and just everything in there. You're like, what is really going on here?
Yeah, what is this really saying?
But in terms of, you know, conspiracy theories, I was just like, whatever. But yeah, eventually...
Yeah, I'd be trying to tell him
something broke.
I'd be trying to tell him they're hiding something archaeological. He's like, why would they hide
stuff?
This? You know?
Yeah,
that's
like,
I don't know.
The question.
Come on. But yeah, eventually something broke through, and that was, for me, that was the giants. Yeah, large skeletons with double rows of teeth buried in the mounds in America, and you know, vanishing into the Smithsonian archives, and I was just like, what?
And that may stem in part from your longtime fascination with, you know, ancient Native American artifacts in the first place.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
I mean, those were the things that really got me going. Like, he would show me images of some of these massive, you know, megalithic sites around the world, and just looking at the joints and stuff, and be like, how did they do this? And I'm just like, well, they did it, bro. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, they figured it out, obviously, so let's not worry about it.
Yeah, it's been done. So
but it's like, you know, I hadn't really gone down the road of, well, let's talk about the tonnage and, like, what does it take to move these types of weights today, and how did the archaeologists say that they did this versus, you know, what other possibilities are there? I had never even considered that stuff, but definitely looking at the interior structure of the Great Pyramid, for example, I was just like, this is really odd. Yeah. And it looks like that may have been built before there was they built a pyramid over top of the King's Chamber structure and all that. And
yep,
it's
I
weird
remember
stuff.
that. Yep.
But yeah, he definitely led me down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories and archaeology, and I'm totally buying it.
Well, that's cool that, like, your, like, path into this alternative world was, like, pretty rock solid, no pun intended, but, like, really with a lot of great minds and a lot of great work, like Randall and everybody. It's like the least crazy stuff you can really break into, and it's like gaining ground a little bit, gaining quite a bit of credibility here and there. You know, we even have Michael Shermer having to, like, publicly acknowledge Graham's work, and I'll have to give it another look or something, you know. So it's at least you you didn't break through into, like, Hollow Earth right away or something like that. But of course, then again, could have. So Russ, what was and, like, when was your kind of, like, fascination with alternative stuff started? Like, was it when you were younger, or did something just hit you in the face and you couldn't look away?
Let's see. So I've been a reader since I was very young. Always had my nose in a book of some kind or another, and I loved science fiction. So I still have a huge library of fiction that I don't ever touch anymore. It's all dusty. I know I can't read fiction anymore hardly.
Right.
Now if I'm reading fiction, I feel like I'm wasting time. But the reason I loved fiction, and I now understand this looking back on it, what I really loved about reading those books was how the characters would deal with some mystery in the book, right? So you're always presented with, in good stories, and you get this from Harry Potter all the way to Robert Heinlein. You're presented with a mystery in the fictional story, and then the characters are moving around the mystery and trying to uncover what's going on, and you're led through the process, right? That was what my favorite thing was. Like, I loved, I have tons of collections of short stories because they're the best ones, and
Hell yeah.
a good old school science fiction short story, like the hard sci-fi, the author would be watching the most recent scientific journals of astronomy or whatever, and then they would read some new discovery or new observation, and then they would take that and say, what is this thing? What could it be? And then they'll write some 10 or 15 page story where some character is interacting with this thing and what it might possibly mean, for humans to interact with this thing. Like Neutron Star is a great example of this. Niven just sends his character off to do a single flyby of a neutron star, and what does that do to you inside the ship, and what does it look like? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I always loved how Niven had this great way of just tossing you into a world he created with no frame of reference.
That's right.
And you really had to figure out what the hell you just read. I know that characters did something somewhere. That's all I got. That's
right. Yeah, and he would like in the Ringworld series, he addresses the question of he basically puts out that humans came from a different planet closer to the galactic center, which is why we're not very suited to Earth's atmosphere. And then he does that thing with the pack protectors. I'm probably getting way too deep in the weeds for some of your listeners here, but
that's okay.
But he basically
They're
says
already there.
Yeah, okay, good. They're in the weeds. He basically says that humans have a third stage of development, which we've lost from being on planet Earth. And that third stage is changes you into an almost immortal protector of all the breeders, is what he called them, which is what we are, right? And it's it completely changes the body and all this stuff, and then the protectors are very smart. And so he's just addressing a lot of ancient mysteries this way. He's just hinting at look at this paleo contact possibility. Look at this directed panspermia possibility, right? So a lot of these ideas were seeded into my mind from reading old sci-fi. And then there was a huge change in our life. We were hit head on by a drunk driver. This happened 20 years ago. But I was in the hospital. I couldn't walk. They had me on all kinds of drugs, and I eventually left the hospital. I came home. I was still doing physical therapy, could barely move around too much. After I had played all my video games twice and read all my fiction again, I had nothing to do.
You ended up on ATS.
That's right. I'm on Above Top Secret looking for conspiracies and reading about weird. I'm basically hunting down mystery, things that are entertaining to me, right?
Yeah.
But that not just ATS. I was also reading entire websites about ancient mysteries.
Oh man, what is it? Tribeca Pleiades or whatever.
Yeah, Bibliotheca Pleiades. And there was one called World Mysteries. I don't even know if they're still around. But I once I found those, I started hunting them down, and then they're showing you, then you're looking at articles about, out of place artifacts, so I'm looking at the London Hammer, I'm looking at these strange discs they think they found in China that have an alien writing on them, all this stuff that's just way out there. I'm like, wow, this is really cool stuff. And I'm reading it in the same way that I read fiction for entertainment. But that eventually led me down the road where I'm like, okay, that one's kind of, that just, I have no way of verifying this or whatever, but this one over here, actually, I can find other things about it. People are talking about this. I can find the Scriptard websites where they're telling you that this is totally normal and everybody completely expected to find this thing and there's nothing weird about it at all or whatever. So it's a real object, and, so that got me interested in that. And then that just kind of leads to, looking at ancient sites where then I'm like, okay, well, let's actually go look at diagrams of the pyramids at Giza or anywhere in Egypt, and like, look at these strange interiors, and like, do they really think these are tombs? And like, wait a minute, and then eventually I found Graham Hancock's book, Fingerprints of the Gods, and after that, it's a well-known, well-trodden path.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, it's been a long, strange journey, but it's been fascinating and fun the whole time. So
yeah, and for me, I was like that whole time. I've just most of the time of my life I've been out in the woods, like
nice.
That's right.
Digging, looking for rocks and digging, and so finding artifacts became a favorite pastime. And so I ended up working on a lot of ranches all over this area of Texas we're in, and every time I'd find out about a new one or somebody that had a ranch that I knew, I was like, dude, let's go. Let's go explore that place. And caves, everything. So it's like finding artifacts and fossils and everything became a huge fascination. And I was learning about how to recognize, occupation sites. And in the process of that, you're looking at the geography of the landscape and like why they choose to be where they are. And so there's all these little details about looking for, where ancient people were. And then in the discovery of an artifact, there's just this immediate overwhelming question of like, who were they? What were they doing here? Where did they go? Because these things most of the ones we're finding are thousands of years old. And that was always just a fascination to me. And, and then remembering like, man, when we were kids, like our parents took us to these crazy ancient sites. Like,
Cool.
we were like, it was kind of like thinking back, just like, dang, man. And then, even looking into the geography of where we moved from, I was like, dude, I think one of the pieces of property that they owned and sold, they would buy like small pieces of just raw property and then kind of try to fix it up and make a little driveway in and then sell it, to make some extra cash. Mm-hmm. And one of the people they sold it to, I think the Smithsonian came and did a dig on that site, and they like uncovered all kinds of artifacts. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like, all these missed opportunities.
Man, shit's been following you guys.
But yeah, it just kind of, when Russ started coming down in the middle of the night freaking out about crazy ancient sites, it was like, I was just immediately ready to like, yeah, let's check it out. Who were these people? Or, I don't know. So it's always been a fascination of mine, just looking into the ancient past. And then upon finding out that what we've been taught is, deeply flawed and mostly made up.
Right.
And I can understand that just history itself is, there's a lot of phrases about history, right? It's written by the victors, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So you got to take it with a grain of salt. But the story that we've told ourselves overall, the big picture of how we just started out with basically nothing and slowly developed technology and got smarter and all that, and then now we're here. When it became pretty clear that was a hugely flawed story, that's when it just got much more fascinating to look into, and wonder about. And it still is. I just can't get enough of it. Think about it all the time.
That's awesome. Yeah, exactly. And that's why you two ventured out. You finally made it to Egypt. Like, congratulations, guys. Seriously. I've been hearing about you guys bitch about this project for so long, and you finally made it happen. And so were you able to see everything you wanted to see? First and foremost, was there anything you missed out on, you feel like?
Well, there's a million details about each site that it was like, dang, wish I forgot about that. We should have looked at that. Or
yeah.
But that's to be expected. You're so busy. Each site you probably spend 2 hours at. People spend their entire lives,
right,
living there and working on these sites. So it's to be expected that you're not going to see everything that you want to see. But it was absolutely amazing. And I have actually had I've been on trips like this before where this is just the way it is. If you want to see as much as possible, you can't spend days at one place.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't. So it's like good to go in and get a broad overview, which I think almost 2.5 weeks was an amazing broad overview of the sites that we're really interested in. And yeah, I would love to spend a week at each one of them, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, you could
just pull a sleeping bag in there and stay for a while. Really take it in.
Yeah, I mean,
let your mind wander.
We spent 3.5 hours walking through Karnak, and we basically saw a tiny fragment of it. I mean, some of those sites are enormous.
And then the other thing is you feel obligated, especially as a content creator, like, well, we got to make content. So you're videoing, you're taking photographs, and you're constantly focused on like, well, I need to photograph this. And then there were certain times when we would talk, we're at it. We just left a site, and it's just like, damn, like, I kind of want to put the phone down or the video camera down and just soak it in, because it is hard to do both. You're paying attention to the video, and you're like, well, I got to make sure this video is nice. And so it's, it's interesting.
That's why it's good that there's two of us, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I
you can switch off.
Yeah, we could switch off. Like, okay, I'll video this stuff, and you just soak it up, listen to Yusuf, and back and forth.
Yeah, it's interesting how as content creators, automatically it's suddenly you're trying to give the information to other people, so you're kind of just having to stand by and not really experience it yourself sometimes, and you get caught up in that sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there was some goals that I had that were, data collection goals that I feel like I pretty much failed at. It's just things that you don't think of when you're in the moment and you're being rushed, and there's secrecy involved because, you got to obey the rules, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
So there's a little bit of secrecy, and then you miss things, and then you're like, like I can't even tell where I was when I took that photo or when I took that video, and
Yeah.
So that's it's a learning. There's definitely a learning curve.
Yep.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna ask you about. Like, Zahi Hawass is now out. He's been dethroned, and I can't remember the guy's name, Mustafa or Mufasa.
Yeah, the new guy.
Mufasa Amin. I don't know. I haven't heard much about him. He doesn't seem to be a Hawass kind of character,
right.
But and I've also heard pretty positive things over the past year about Egypt being much more open than it was before. But then, of course, I've heard you guys, you were just there saying this isn't going to last. People are taking LiDAR and going to town on stuff.
I have a bad feeling that once somebody gets their hands on some LiDAR scans that somebody's done with that they're going to try to do something about. I don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
you can't take people's phones away from them.
Definitely, they can stop you from using it, because it's if you were looking at someone's phone screen, it would be obvious what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got shot in the eye with a laser for videoing at one spot.
Yep.
Whoa.
A bright, I was like, and then it burned. Like afterwards, I was just like, oh my God, my eyes were burning.
Yeah, you may have seen, I don't know how much you're on. Well, I saw it on Twitter, but I know it was elsewhere. It made news.
The opening of the avenue.
The opening of the Avenue of the Sphinxes between, They were, so when we were there, they were practicing for that whole thing, and they were
the big ceremony.
The big ceremony they were doing, and they were, you can hear it in our videos on the live stream we were doing. They're shouting, and they got this megaphone, and they're playing this loud ass music.
People are marching around. They're practicing
practicing the march, and they're doing it in the dark. And like when the tourists are coming out of Luxor, you're facing down the avenue of the Sphinxes, and we're all videoing stuff, and they obviously want to keep their ceremony secret. whatever they're doing, they want it to be a big reveal. So we're all videoing, and they're like shooting lasers at us to make us turn
they're
away.
they're just shaking the laser like this.
Yeah,
and it's just,
anybody they see with a camera, they're pointing the laser at them and like shaking it all over the place. They were nailing all of us with it, and and then they were like,
I had one in my backpack too. I was like, oh my God, I want to pull it out.
And shoot
Get you
lasers
back.
Yeah, you want to get into a sword fight? Yeah.
Oh, a laser battle in Egypt. That just sounds so great.
I would have lost. I mean,
It definitely would have lost.
This security measures, they just seem kind of poorly planned. Like, oh crap, they're still here looking at stuff.
Yeah.
Like, seriously? This is
what-
the best they could do.
That's what, some of the organizers for the trip, they were like, they should have told us we could have come a different day.
Yeah.
Instead of shooting lasers in our faces, they could have just said, hey, don't, close the site. Don't come out here tonight because we're going to be practicing our super secret ceremony thing.
Yeah,
But we were walking past and they're built, they're obviously preparing for something cool. They were building a golden freaking boat and you could see them working on it. They're grinding on this thing over there and welding and stuff. And then where the people are marching, they got these dudes walking, carrying poles like they're going to be carrying that thing on their shoulders. So you could definitely tell what was happening.
Yeah. There's no getting around it.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty obvious what was going on. Yeah. So
Not a lot of cover in that area.
right. Yeah.
So let's see. Where should we go from here? I mean, we could talk about so many different things. What was your favorite? What was the most mind-blowing thing that you guys experienced about being in Egypt? Was it the size of everything? Was it like, because I always hear that, like, you think it's big until you get there and it's just so much bigger. Like the pyramids are so immense and they take your breath away.
Yeah. I mean, those first couple of days on Giza were, it's hard to tell looking back if that was mind blowing because it's the first site we visited and it's huge. But I don't know. We went back there the very last day of the tour and you're still like, holy shit, right? So it's just,
the pyramids
so
are constantly mind blowing.
Yeah.
While you're there, and I definitely had a big mind blown moment stepping into the King's Chamber. I mean, it was just,
That's cool. I've heard that from many people about the King's Chamber.
Yeah, it was just amazing. Like how it's very large. I mean, you see it on video, and I mean, even my videos of it doesn't can't. But going in there and experiencing the, I don't know what to call it, the comparison. Just like standing in it and feeling the whole size of it, and for me, it was like. There's always something about like a signature of those who created it, and there's some connection. I don't know if it's exactly spiritual because people have asked me that. Like, did you have people talk about having spiritual feelings or moments in the Great Pyramid?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have initially defined it that way, but it was just like this. It was just absolutely amazing stepping in there and just seeing this incredible size of this beautiful room and the just gigantic mystery of what it is and why and who and the abilities of the people who built it, the engineers who designed it and pulled it off. And
I had that with the Grand Gallery. I mean,
Russ, I could hear it in your voice when you stepped in. Oh my God.
Because up to that point, you're walking through, Al Mamun's tunnel, which is rough and it's cool looking, but it's very rough. You get into the descending passage, and so you're kind of doing the pyramid walk. You're crouched down, and it's very cramped. And then you have to kind of go around the plug blocks, which is another tunneled hole through the core masonry, so it's cramped, and there's crappy wooden steps going up. And then you get up, once you get out through that, you suddenly are in this chamber that it's absolutely enormous. And I came out in that thing, I was like, oh my God, because we'd seen corbelled chambers in plenty of other places in Egypt. They seem to be a feature of interior pyramid construction. But none of them, I mean, they're all beautiful, but none of them, number one, were tilted. All of them were flat. Like you're standing on a flat floor, and the chamber itself is corbelled, and it's basically horizontal to the ground.
Mhm.
You come out in the Grand Gallery, it's like that, but they've tilted it up 45 degrees and then they've stretched it out for 120 feet or whatever. It's unbelievably enormous, and it's so big and so strangely tilted, and all the lines or whatever. We've talked about this multiple times. There's kind of weird optical illusion, where your mind wants to look up, and then your brain starts telling you that you're looking at a straight, flat chamber. So
Right.
you're feeling like there's gravity acting in a weird way, pulling you backwards instead of down. Because the whole thing is tilted, and so you're looking up and you start it's so strange, and it's just, I don't know, that was walking into the Grand Gallery really did blow my mind. Like I've never seen anything like it. Obviously there's plenty of stuff in Egypt that there's nothing like it elsewhere in the world, but that there was just and again, I wouldn't call it spiritual. It was just amazing, technically speaking. And again, there's the question of like, well, I see the builder's skill, and but then on the other hand, you're like, but why did they do this? What is this for?
Yeah.
There's both the mystery, which I love, and also the absolute amazing skill and unbelievable like technical achievement of it. So
Yeah, some of it being mind blowing, especially if all of it's true. I watched, I've watched many Egyptian documentaries, but one of them that I saw a couple of years back really hit me good. I think it was Revelations of the
Oh, yeah.
Pyramids.
That's a
man.
great one. Those guys are awesome.
Dude.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
Those ancient mysteries. So yeah.
the way that they kind of show you that the Great Pyramid is like a microcosm of the entire Earth or something, or like the north, it like, I can't even, I'm going to butcher it
model of the
completely.
northern hemisphere,
Yeah,
basically.
scale model of the northern hemisphere, right?
Which, I mean, I don't even know what kind of perspective or knowledge you'd have to be able to calculate something like that to begin with, other than what we have now. But
Yeah.
then again, I don't know if I even believe in aliens, so I don't know.
Right. And then the scale that if it is a scale model of the northern hemisphere, the scale that they chose to use shows that they had deep knowledge of the precession of the equinoxes as well. So you're basically diving into like, okay, they had very detailed astronomical knowledge and geographical knowledge, because to be able to build a scale model of the northern hemisphere using that kind of structure with that particular kind of scale means that you need to know, the circumference of the Earth in both directions around the equator and from pole to pole. And then you need to have a deep understanding of large astronomical cycles like precession. So if those things are true. And then there's all these other numbers that are built into the structure that you can find, pi and phi and
Yeah.
these transcendental numbers, which if you think about it, the whole idea of a decimal place is it's a relatively new thing. Like 0 wasn't supposed to be known by ancient peoples. Like they didn't have the concept of nothing and it being a placeholder, right? And the idea of I can't remember exactly there's a term for it, but like putting a number in a certain position tells you that it's like 100 instead of 1, right? Like so when you have 1 over here followed by 2 zeros, that 1 can act as 100. Right. And that kind of decimal placement is supposed to be a brand new thing. And yet to calculate things like the precession of the equinoxes and be able to have placeholders and move them around freely, you have to understand those things. Right. So there's all this interesting kind of stuff. And we saw plenty of examples of hieroglyphic numbering systems, and they didn't do that, So you're looking at dynastic numerals. There were plenty of places where Yusuf is showing us, and there's this whole panel, and it's covered in all these little hieroglyphs. They're relatively simple, but it's basically they're counting stuff. And it's more like the way that they would write it out is more like what the Roman numerals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those guys, they write this big string of letters that equaled a number, but they don't have decimal. You don't ever see like XXII.I.
Right.
They didn't have 21.1. They didn't do that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's interesting stuff. Like, yeah. So again, when you're going to the idea of a transcendental or a like pi is defined by a decimal and then an endless string of numbers.
Right.
You can also represent it by using other like ratios, but you can't really get close enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the same thing with phi, and yet you see it in their structures that they understood this relationship of 1.618.
Now, you can represent these things in geometry without the numbers.
That's right.
There are methods to, just with a compass and a straight edge to represent phi and pi, obviously. And then, of course, all of the precessional numbers are embedded into certain shapes based on their degrees of angle, but you have to start with the system that divides the circle into 360 parts, and divides each degree into 60 parts, and then divides each one of those degrees into 60 more parts.
Yeah.
Once you have that system, then you basically can make geometrical shapes that are the base shapes, the five platonic solids, the base, the main, triangle, square, hexagon, all these shapes have certain angles, right? And then when you build three-dimensional structures out of those angles within are all precessional numbers. It's so
yeah, that's right.
I think that system is extremely old, and it doesn't. I can't read hieroglyphs, obviously, but I haven't heard anybody talking about any hieroglyphic reliefs that are describing this type of geometry. Yet it's built into their structures everywhere. So where are the engineering drawings of like the next giant pyramid that's going to have all these these fundamental principles built into it, right?
Yeah, where are those scrolls?
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. There were certain things.
So do you think that the 360 whatever that system would have to be derived from already understanding precession? Like, in other words, like that understanding is built in, or it derives from it, or do you think that you can arrive at all the precessional numbers starting out with a 360 system and not, or do you think it was basically? I'm asking, do you think it was designed with that in mind?
Yes, I do, because
that's what I think too. Yeah.
I think that number system was designed after the Earth was measured, after the Moon was measured, and after they had an accurate calendar and they understood long cycles. Once these things were understood, I can imagine implementing a new system, right, which created a harmony between ourselves, mankind, and where we are in the solar system and all these cycles. Now, obviously, we have 365 and a quarter day, roughly, or whatever, in a year. So it's not perfect, but it's close.
Very close.
There are some people that think that the original system was based on 366 days, which is, I think, a sidereal year, something closer to that. But I don't know much about all that. I think that system was chosen, just like we chose to develop a metric system after we developed all of these like chemistry and sciences that needed a system that was like unified across weights and volumes, and that it just makes it really easy when you're measuring, when you're going from one type of measurement to a totally different, like a volumetric versus weight measurement of things. And once you're able to measure the mass of the different elements, then you can, and you have all of this data, then you can say, okay, well, let's develop a measurement system that sort of has this harmony between all of these things that we understand about the universe.
Right.
Now it gets really easy to work with all that stuff. You know what I mean? So that's what it seems like to me.
I like that.
But I'm not going to say that. Yeah. So I guess the conclusion is, if these things are built into the Great Pyramid, it seems plausible that system was known and already existed at the time that building was planned.
Yep.
Had to have. I mean, whether we're talking about Martians or people from another dimension or people, just people. I don't know. Like, what do you guys think of that? There's like viral videos of this guy like cutting through one of the megalithic blocks and like hitting it with a hammer. And I'm like, yeah, but he'd have to do that every 2 minutes and then drag it 500 miles. So that doesn't really work, right? People are trying to be like, solved. We figured it out.
Well, we just had a great conversation about this the other day. But what do you have something?
Well, yeah, let's start with the cutting. I mean,
Okay.
it depends on what you're cutting. The limestone of the core blocks is probably not that difficult to cut. I mean, difficult is relative here. Relative to granite, and then relative to the limestone of the casing stones.
Should I bring in a piece of limestone and a chainsaw? We'll just do an experiment on the show.
That sounds great. Next time.
Yeah, it's not that difficult to cut.
Right.
But when you start working on granite, it is difficult to cut. And then the what we learned about the core or the casing stones is that stuff is also be really difficult to cut. That stuff basically here we call it chert. It's really close to being like a kind of flint. You know.
Yeah, it's like it's a low grade silicate. Like it's high. It's got a high silicate content.
Right. So it's almost flint, which makes it very difficult to cut and very hard. You know, but incredibly strong and smooth, and you can make it smooth if you've got the right tools. So that's the first problem. Then the second thing is that only the granite had to come 500 or 600 miles. Most of the limestone. Well, I actually can't say that about the casing stones. I'm not sure how far away that particular source is, but most of
it came from Tura.
Yeah, most of the core blocks
on the east bank. I think,
okay, yeah, most of the core blocks were sourced from fairly close by, but still, they're big.
Yeah,
they're big blocks. Now, it's not obviously it's not impossible. The dynastic Egyptians were totally capable of moving heavy loads. Like we went through plenty of temples that are clearly dynastic in origin. And while they didn't make monolithic granite columns, they instead built them by stacking up discs of limestone and then carving those nice and smooth. Those discs are still huge.
So Tura, Egypt, is located about halfway between modern day Cairo and Helwan. So I don't know where Helwan is, but I don't either. Cairo. Let's see.
Yeah, how far is that from Giza?
Where's a map here? I mean, we drove for how long was it? It was like an hour and a half drive from Cairo.
Oh, from the airport to Giza. Yes. Cairo's a huge city.
This up. I'll look this
Cairo's up. It is. It's massive.
Yeah, yeah. So we landed at the airport, and then we spent an hour driving from the airport to the hotel. And even from the hotel, you still couldn't see the pyramids. And then from the hotel, it was another, 15 or 20 minutes to get to Giza, which is on the outskirts, right? So there's no city up there on the plateau. But yeah. Anyway, I don't have any problem with being able to cut and move heavy loads by people who didn't have all the machinery we have. The question is would they do this? Like, would they? Not necessarily could they, but first question is, would they? What is it for? Because it's not a tomb. Like, I don't care what they say. It's clearly not a tomb. So the next question is what is this structure for?
Yeah, aren't what we've found so far for pharaohs and royalty have been buried in the Valley of the Kings?
Yeah, there's a lot of them that were buried in the Valley of King. And even when we were there, we went into 3 of the Valley of the King tombs. You still have the question, you're like, did they find these?
Right.
And bury themselves down in here? Or, I mean, like, were these pre-existing tunnels that they went in and painted all over? And, I mean, it's actually absolutely beautiful artwork in a lot of cases. But, once again, you get down into the bottom of it, and there's this gigantic granite box. I mean, and not just like a sarcophagus, but some of these boxes were huge, like bigger than our studio here, and you're like, okay, that's a huge granite box. What is that really for? And then the box itself is executed beautifully. It's this gorgeous artifact, and then there's writing all over the outside that's like looks like somebody's like they let a kid scratch the stuff on there because it's made out of granite and it's really hard to write on, right? So the question is like, okay, so they made this gorgeous box, and then they let like Johnson write all the on there that the Pharaoh was built in here. You're just like, I don't think so. So again, you're wondering like, did they find these tunnels in the Valley of the Kings? And if not, they were totally capable of digging them, I think. But then the next question is did they find these boxes and just reuse them? That's the big question. Is like all over Egypt, you see evidence of reuse of older stuff. And it's always the case that the people who are reusing the older stuff clearly did not have as much skill as the people who made the older stuff.
Right. It's a degradation rather than an evolution, sadly.
It's a degradation, yeah. The newer the temple, the smaller the columns, the less good the writing, everywhere, all across the entire country.
Do you think that's because we were huge at one point, just like the flora and everything?
Oh,
like
man.
Everything was much bigger. Is that the reason? Because what we're talking about here, it's a really well framed way to put this, lost civilization from the past, because it's like, take all the cave paintings, all the hieroglyphs, and disassociate that from what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And it's a different world entirely. So this could have been so long ago. We have no idea, right? They can't date the pyramids, or they can give us dates, but you know what I mean?
Yep. Well, I can tell you, if you had mammoths as beasts of burden, you could move a lot heavier stuff. It would be a lot easier, right?
Still can't get those boxes down in the freaking Serapeum.
And we're saying boxes about the Serapeum, right? It's like we're calling them boxes because they look like boxes, but are they hollow?
Yeah.
Can they be opened?
Yeah. They have lids.
How heavy are those lids?
30 tons.
30 tons.
So who the fuck is open?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
The box, once it's cut open, once it's made into a box, no, it's no longer just a solid stone, is like 100 tons.
This does sound like Johnson. It's like, I made a box. How are we gonna get it open?
Yeah.
I didn't. Well,
Yeah.
it's let my kid write on it. Never mind.
Yeah, I don't know what those boxes were for. They definitely weren't for the whole Apis bull ceremony, because they didn't find it. Again, like the pyramids, no remains were found in these things. There was a box that they found a bunch of disarticulated and unconsolidated remains of stuff, but it was a whole bunch of things, including bull parts. But that was like a wooden box or something. I don't know. Maybe it was a alabaster one, but it wasn't one of the big Serapeum boxes. I don't know. They all of these were empty, but most of them, I think, were emptied in antiquity. In other words, out of the 20, is it 24, 27?
24.
24 of them, 23 were open when it was found by archaeologists in, like, I don't know, the late 1800s or whatever. And then they blasted the only one that wasn't open, the one that had the lid still sealed on it. They blasted that one open, and it was empty.
Probably hoping to find something amazing.
Well, yeah, who knows? I would have
They
been.
ran off with 23 of whatever this was.
Yeah, that's right.
See, to me, I've always thought that suggests that whoever came and opened the boxes to retrieve what was in them knew
that there was
that
nothing.
one didn't have anything in it.
Yeah. Or it
Ooh,
was,
yeah.
the only thing we put
So
in there
that's-
was argon. Just
That suggests that
we
the,
filled it with argon gas.
yeah, that suggests the people that came and got the stuff were like at least inheritors of the knowledge of the fact that they were there and the contents.
Yeah.
So if, I guess maybe if there was a treasure map somewhere, but I don't know.
Nicolas Cage would be on it.
Yeah, I'm thinking more in terms of a time capsule or a safe type of situation where you're putting something and you're recording what you're putting in there, and you're doing it for a reason because it could be destroyed or it could be whatever. It seems like natural disaster protection to me, but I don't know. This is just one of the ideas.
Yeah.
And then later, when it's over, if it's your descendants or whatever that are like, okay, let's go get the stuff. They know where it is. They know which ones to open. But
And then there seems to be this veneration of that place by later and later and later generations. So this is what you see. Like there are, when you go into the Serapeum, there's all of these little alcoves, strange alcoves on the walls of the tunnel. Now, the tunnels are very rough cut. They're nothing like the boxes. The boxes are these gorgeous, polished, beveled, almost crystal-looking artifacts. You know, each one in its own little alcove. The tunnels themselves are incredibly rough. Like, they're well done, but it's clear that whoever made the place didn't care about the walls of the tunnel. They're just like, we need a hollow space underground, not built, but cut out of the bedrock with a single entrance, you know, that's easy to block up or whatever. Put all the boxes in there. The boxes are what they cared about in terms of precision. But when you're coming in and you're looking at the walls of the passageways, there are these gravestone-looking shapes carved into them, like a deep set, and it's got a classic shape of a gravestone, like a flat bottom and a rounded top, and they're much taller than they are wide. And the story is that that's where plaques would be set, and those would have, and maybe they're clay tablets or even candles or whatever. But in other words, they're like little votive spots. Like if you think of votive candles in a church, you see these little alcoves where they've got candles and they put a little plaque there and it says something or whatever. So these are all cut and people's names were put in there if you paid for it, right? It's the same thing in some of the writing in these areas where you see a cartouche and it's empty. And in other words, the idea is that no one had paid for their name to be put in there yet. Like the priest had carved this thing and they're selling, like, hey, only $50, I'll put your name on the cartouche that we've carved into this ancient artifact that's being venerated for some reason. Like, why do you care?
Yeah.
Why do you care if your name is carved there? But it's like, they are venerating this place. So even way after somebody had, gone in there and maybe taken what was in them, the memory that this was an important site that was built by the ancients, the Shemsuhor or the people of Zep-Tepi, the earliest times in their own stories, they're still venerating these places. Like, you want to be associated with this place because these are the people of the first time. So I like that. That's the idea that I get in a lot of these places. And like, that's why they're carving their names on stuff that is much older that they didn't build, right? You're trying to associate yourself with something that your entire culture venerates as being the followers of the sons of God or whatever.
Oh my God, you're describing an ancient selfie. Not to downgrade it, but
yeah. Ramses II was big on selfies.
He's just
yeah.
So was there anything you found there you guys got to see and learn about that completely changed your perspective on it? Like something that you had already had some preconceived ideas and theories about and got to see something with, firsthand that really upgraded or altered the way you thought about it?
Yeah, it's kind of a minor thing, I guess, but when we were looking at the unfinished obelisk, it occurred to me that because this thing it's still in the quarry and it's the biggest one, and then there's something similar to that on Easter Island, right? There's the Moai statue that's still in the quarry and it's the biggest one. Now, I haven't been to Easter Island to see if it's the same case as what it is in Egypt, but
then there's Baalbek. There's
the
blocks in the quarry, and they're the biggest.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
this is a recurring theme.
It's sort of a combination of this idea with being able to inspect the construction sites at various stages of construction, because in certain places there would be finished walls and finished pillars and unfinished pillars next to each other, so you can kind of get an idea of like, okay, they stacked it up like this and then they did this, and so you get this idea of like how the builders function, and then what the materials were like coming out of the quarry to the site, and then what they were like going into the building, and then what the finished aspect of the building was. And so there's taking all of that into account, I realized, and this may or may not be true, but this is what I thought, that it's no wonder that the unfinished obelisk is the biggest one, because it's roughed out and it's about to have to travel possibly 500 miles, depending on where it was going. But let's just say it was going to Giza. It's going to go 500 miles, and it's not going to be finished until it's on site. Like, in other words, the stone's going to remain rough cut. So with this object being, like the finished object being very particular in its proportions, if the person at the quarry knows that the finished obelisk has to be a certain length and a certain width and depth, and they're roughing it out and it's about to travel 500 miles, you're not going to cut it to those exact proportions because it's going to chip off a corner somewhere. The top of it might break off or something, you know. So you make it large because they're going to actually take it down there, and once they get it erected, then they're going to carve it down into the thing that it's supposed to be, or whether it's laying on the ground and they stood it up after, I don't know. The point is, even the top of it, when you're looking at the top down and it's getting wider as it goes away from you, you can tell that this is not, it's not straight. The corners are not straight. Nothing's straight about it. So, overall, it seems very straight.
Yeah, it's roughed out.
But it's roughed out.
Yeah.
So if there was a deviation in the angle by, a few inches, that's going to determine how much stone you have to take off to make it perfectly proportional. Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking that it may not have been the biggest obelisk after it was finished. Yeah. And that could be the same for the Moai statue. Perhaps the same for the Baalbek blocks.
The fun thing about the Moai statue, though, is it's still in the quarry and it has a face. It's like those guys were not roughing anything out.
Okay, see, that's what I hadn't actually looked at that one.
It's already got most. They've been sculpting it into, or unless that was done way later, which is possible. Somebody carved a face onto it, just sitting down there in the quarry.
Right, and you would imagine that the proportions of the face are going to be roughly the same.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're not going to carve out a nice nose and eyebrows and everything and then just, like, carve them down more. So, I hadn't looked at it, but that was the thought. That was
yes, I agree. And we saw this, like, that they clearly were thinking about transporting the blocks, and so they'd leave them rough.
Yeah, and also you saw in the buildings when a corner had been broken off that was after the stone had already been, honed down to its roughly finished state, they would fill it. They would actually cut it square. If it was broken off down here, they'd cut it square and then they'd fit a little block tile in there.
Yep.
So, of course, if you were going to cut a stone from the quarry and send it hundreds of miles away, knowing that if a corner breaks off, the guy's going to have to cut a square out of it and fit another block in there, you're just going to leave it larger than it needs to be.
Yeah. You don't carve out the 2x4s or the planks until you get them out of the forest and off the logging trucks, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's right.
Yep.
And so that was pretty cool. That it was. I would say most of the things that changed the way I look at stuff had to do with construction methods. It had to do with these interesting ways that they made joints in blocks and going around corners and stuff like that. We've described that quite a bit, I think, in the last number of shows.
Yeah, and it had to do a lot with the fact that all across Egypt there seemed to be this problem of construction jobs not getting completed for whatever reason. So once you'd been to multiple sites, you began to have this catalog in your mind of like, okay, that one was finished out all the way. They flattened the walls. This one, they were in the middle of flattening the walls and they didn't never finish it. And then over here, this wall was just never flattened. They never even got to starting to flattening it. And so and then in other places you could see, because it was broken, you could basically walk, like Kyle said, you could walk to the end of the wall and look at the inside of it because it's been broken off and that part over there is fallen down. So you can see inside corners, how they fitted them together deep into the wall that you can't see if you're just looking at the face of the wall. You don't even know that those blocks are actually 6 feet deep until you walk to the end of the wall and turn around and look, and you're like, wow, the blocks are actually deeper than they are wide when you're looking at the front face. Like, in other words, it's like a brick that you're looking at the narrow end. You know, the
Yeah.
what you see on that's sticking out of the wall is the narrow end of the brick, and the long end of the brick is actually going into the wall and attaching to the interior structure. And you don't know that when you're just looking at the wall. But because a lot of these places were falling down, they were in part ruined, so you could see interior specifics like that. And then as you went to more and more sites, you saw similar details, or you'd see an extreme example of something, and then it would become clear. And all these other places you'd been to, you're like, what the hell is that about? Would suddenly you're like, okay, maybe this is what they're doing. You know, so things like blocks going around corners, that became much more understandable. Possible ways that they finished out interiors of rooms by, you know, they leave the blocks, like Kyle said, rough on the front edges, and then you come in and plane it off, which makes the whole room wider, which makes blocks go around corners if you do it that way. So it's really you know, there was a lot of things that not necessarily changed our view, but like things were made much clearer, or you're like, okay, here's a possible way of why they're doing it this way, or why it looks this way when it's finished.
Seems like a very humbling experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we have this pattern seemingly everywhere of older structures repeatedly being built on top of lesser quality further ahead in time. Do you guys, are you interested in like the ideas about Tartaria and all that kind of stuff? Have you looked into those areas? And the crazy loopy idea about the 1800s and all that? Mud floods.
Really, that's not old enough for me.
That's true. Fair enough.
Yeah, I have not delved into it, but I'm aware of it.
I want to know what you think about it. Can you briefly describe it?
Yeah, sure. I've been getting into it a lot the past few months. Especially now that I've started a different podcast as well with another couple friends, specifically talking about language and where languages came from. And specifically, we're working on this Scandinavian story from a very, very long time ago. But yeah, it's like supposedly all over the world at some point, which sounds like Atlantis to me. But I'm starting to see Atlantis more as maybe a time period rather than a specific place, perhaps. But that's besides the point. I think Tartaria, the main focus of it is that the theory is that something happened possibly in the 1800s that wiped off this whole like evidence of this civilization or something. But then there's another angle to it that just simply describes it as like pre-Russian history and that whole area, and that they were kind of just eradicated and chased out. I'm butchering it too, because there's just a lot of missing details, and it's still, there's a lot of conjecture there. I was just curious of your take on it, if you guys knew much about it.
I was hoping it would spark my memory, because I was reading something recently that referenced Tartaria, and I know that this actually, so I can't remember what it was, but where I was reading it had nothing to do with this modern idea about Tartaria. And so I was like, okay, this actually is some kind of ancient place, or is it ancient
Tartarus, or the Tartars.
I think it was in Petrie's book. Yeah. And so like this is a mysterious ancient place or something like that. But I think some of this might be associated with gigantic, like, what do they call it? What are the giant figures in the ground?
Huge geoglyphs?
Yeah, geoglyphs and stuff like that that are eroded. Is that?
No, not specifically. I mean, I'm sure someone's taken it there. I can guarantee it. But this is the Tartaria stuff. Are you guys fans of Game of Thrones?
Oh yeah.
Chance? Okay, so
you know about Game of Dooskies.
He is.
Yeah, the Dooskies, right? So just think about the Targaryens and their whole lineage. And eventually this other power decided to rip them limb from limb and destroy them, and eventually chase down the very last members of that family, for God forbid if they ever get back to the Seven Kingdoms and tell their side of the story.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Tartaria sounds like a little bit. Whereas, but it feels like that, where it seems like it was a race of people perhaps, or something, that were obliterated. And a lot of people point to the Bolshevik Revolution, saying that hidden in plain sight was these Tartars that were exterminated, basically.
But also encompassed in that is the idea that they built all these amazing structures all over the world,
And that the
yes,
modern civilization claims them as ours, but they're not really, right?
and
Something like that.
I think we kind of need your voices on this, because you guys love the technical side of this and the architectural side specifically, because yes, there's a lot of talk about the 1800s, and look, they got buggies and carts and their streets are filled with mud and shit. And there's that cathedral that was supposedly built in this many years.
Yeah.
And then it gets into the world's fairs and all that kind of stuff.
So I think the story that I believe is even stranger than that.
Ooh, good.
But this is, the fact that the cathedral building just sprang up like the Gothic cathedrals, this art form and the massive labor force that had to be well trained in all these aspects of sacred geometry and architecture that hadn't been seen probably for thousands of years, just suddenly shows up, and they start building stuff all over the place.
Yeah, we're honoring this random ancient culture.
Yeah, and at the same time, practically across an ocean, the Puebloan culture starts doing massive stone construction projects in giant cliff walls, building cities in these overhangs that are 400 feet above the valley. I mean, 200 feet from the top of the cliff. I mean, it's
That's
just
a nice connection.
And the geometry that they build into the kivas and which are these strange, mysterious structures that are all over the place in the Puebloan culture, have a lot of similar geometry to some of the features in these Gothic cathedrals. That's pretty
dude. That's a crazy connection.
Yeah, and that
And some of the weird Templar ones that are round, like the Kiva stuff is.
yeah,
Yeah.
these round yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think also that I don't want to get into politics here, but the founding fathers of the United States revered the ancient architects as well.
Yes.
A number of them did, and a lot of these guys were very well read, and these people, they devoured books. They were fluent. They could read Latin, so they were able to get source texts and read that. We can't do that today. Like, hardly anybody is fluent. That's almost a dying art,
Right.
So
true.
they were fascinated by the building projects of the ancient world, and so I think that is why you see these interesting geometrical layouts in the Capitol, and then of course the buildings look like these ancient
Greek structures.
Yeah,
and
ancient
stuff,
Greek
yeah.
structures. They built a giant obelisk there with the mirror. It's like, yeah, because they were saying like, this is like some of the most amazing achievements of mankind,
Hmm.
and we want to emulate that. And I think that's
and I think they also were students of the work of more recent people, like people in the Royal Society. Like Hooke, I think, was responsible. Was it Hooke that like rebuilt London after the Great Fire?
I think so.
Yeah, there were architects that were responsible for a bunch of stuff like over in the old world that had kind of done the same thing. They were all embedded in, like Sir Isaac Newton, they're embedded in alchemical texts. They're looking for ancient documents. They're interested in ancient architecture. And then half of London burns down, so they rebuild it using a lot of these principles. You know, they're able to basically come in with a blank slate because a bunch of the city burned down, and they start building all these interesting street plans and stuff, and they're putting sacred geometry into it, and that kind of stuff happens over here as well. But there is, some of the stuff I've seen with the Tartaria stuff. I don't know how much this is specifically about Tartaria, but there's people point to like, well, look at the courthouses in all these little towns all over the place, and how they have the same structural elements. And it signifies possibly, well, and that they look different from everything else in the town, like all the stuff on them, right? And that's a great point. It's totally true. But what they're saying is like this points to a global, or at least a continent-wide style of building, rather than just this little town. And that's absolutely true, because buildings like that work. The impetus for building those like central structures in those towns was coming from a much larger society than that little town. I don't know if that necessarily means that that those courthouses or whatever are like being reused. They're reused structures of some ancient lost civilization, but they definitely have a global influence as opposed to a local one.
Right.
And so that's why they stand out from all the other buildings that are around them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other aspect of people at least like to put them together is this mud flood idea, which I don't know how valid it is, especially since someone like Randall probably hasn't had his eyes on it, or if he did, maybe he went and walked away. I don't know. But that's the problem with some of these conspiracy theories. Some of them I leave out no matter what, but then others, it's like, okay, well, there's some seriously weird questions here, but it does seem really far out. We need more professional eyes on this. We need someone to tear it apart, and I feel like we're in this weird place where a lot of people just aren't willing to look in the weird places,
Yeah. Well, one thing we've learned with Randall is that enormous mud floods. I just don't know if they're responsible if they happen in the 1800s. No, like the ones we're looking at with Randall are 12,000, 14,000 years old.
Right, of course. So maybe he would be the right one, because he'd be able to tell probably almost immediately. But what they're finding for quote unquote evidence is just very old pictures of this time period I take that back. They're showing pictures from later in like the 1900s, where there was massive excavation, and all these buildings at road level were excavated way down, and there's windows and doors and all kinds of very strange things. And I don't know if people are just grasping at straws and creating a narrative or what, but it does. We can all agree that something's being hidden about overseas, about the older places out there. I mean, shit, we got the Iraq war happening. That whole desert's on fire. Meanwhile, you've got right there, like the oldest city in the world. So it's like shit's being skewed regardless of who we think it is or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it could have happened here. I don't know. I mean, it's weird about the orphan trains. That's another aspect that a lot of us get into about Tartaria. Yeah. But who knows? Maybe we're just letting our fantasies get the best of us. A lot of times that is the case.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about the buildings, the Capitol buildings and things like that, and the architecture. I can't find this, and I can't remember where I heard this, so it will probably need to be fact checked since, we get most everything wrong.
Fact check false.
But it was something about I can't remember if it was Jefferson or Adams, that was when they were talking about building these structures in the capitals, that they wanted people, when they came into these structures, to revere them and have this sense of like, wow, this is like important. They didn't want it to just be some cookie cutter random structure. They wanted there to be that sense of awe when you came into.
Yeah, in a sense that you're a part of a greater civilization than just your little town with its, dirt roads.
I mean, this is where, in their minds, this is where we're going to be doing civilization building.
Yeah.
Right. With principles and laws and ideas. So, I mean, I know we're a long way from that, but that was the intent. So I think having researched quite a bit on the founding fathers, like I have a lot of respect for those guys, for, the times that they lived in, and what they did. And I think that was one of the goals. Right.
Yeah.
So and then at the same time, it's like that the idea that, and I don't know if this is specifically connected to Tartaria, but these giant structures that people look up on Google Maps and they're like, look at the design of this quarry that they're digging out, and you can see these giant faces and stuff like that. Like, I've been in quite a few quarries.
Yeah, I think that's more out at the edge of mountains or ancient fossil trees. I don't think the Tartaria guys go too much into that.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know where that's
They feel like that those guys are in the extreme.
They're the fringe.
Well, see, that's the thing. I mean, you guys know how it is. It's like there really is no line between any of these levels. It's all scale invariance, right? It just kind of spirals out of control at some level.
Yeah,
but
the mudflood / Tartaria guys that I've interacted with thought that those people were way too far out there. They were like, look, I feel like those are red herrings. Like, this just makes the whole thing look stupid.
Yeah, and growing up as a huge fan of Close Encounters, like Devil's Tower is like one of my favorite monuments in America. So people coming along saying it's a tree took me by surprise. But then again, there's some weird shit there too that I want someone more professional to look at, because it's something about the shape of the cellular structure of a tree. And then apparently someone claims that Devil's Tower has the same cellular structure or something like that. So it could totally be bullshit. It could totally be clickbait garbage, but it might not be. I just want things clarified,
It wouldn't even surprise me if there was some kind of symmetry in the crystallization of this amalgam of materials that is basalt and other things that we find in the natural world, like in cellular structure. I mean, this is I think that's kind of, to me, that was one of the focus points of sacred geometry, is that this is the fundamental structure of everything in the universe.
Yeah.
So yes,
cool.
you start exploring sacred geometry, and even when it's just on a piece of paper with a pencil and a compass and a straight edge, and you start working with these principles, you're going to build structures that are similar to structures that we find in nature.
Yes.
Right. So it's because it's the same with math. Like, I'm not a math person, but I've listened to enough of them to know that when they start studying deeply, that they're basically doing the same thing. They're seeing patterns that are fundamental to the nature of the universe. Right.
Yeah, like another good example of that would be, like, have you seen the comparison between the super large structures in the universe, the way matter is strung together, and then like neurons or mycelium?
Hell yeah.
Okay, so
love it.
Yeah, so are we looking at, like, people will look at those pictures and be like, oh my God, the universe
living in a giant brain.
Yeah, it's a giant brain. Or
which it might be.
Or or the whole thing's a piece of mushroom, or it's that these patterns repeat in nature, and like you said, they're scale invariant.
Yes, I like that. Okay, cool. Thank you for taking me back down to earth with that one.
So, but like going on I was trying to look some stuff up while y'all were talking about the mud flood idea, but the
Lus is like, it is a mud flood.
That's what I'm saying. And so, like, let's say that there was a structure that, let's see, people in the Tartaria people, that's what I'm going to call those people, that they're like, hey, this, there was a mud flood here, and it buried this structure or something. Mm-hmm. Well, what kind of flood are we talking about? A flowing river of mud? There's no structure there anymore. Like, that's a landslide.
Structure is gone. Yeah.
Structure gone. Yeah. But if the structure is there, then it wasn't that kind of mud flood.
Right.
So did it precipitate out of the sky? And if so, it should have a Lus pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It should have a vertical structure to its to the sedimentary layers, or whatever you call them. So that should be testable.
There is another theory, and I'd have to look it up too. There's a certain word for it. It's something about, I think it can happen during earthquakes where when everything starts to, yes, there it is, liquefaction. So yeah, turns into gravy and then suddenly solidifies again.
Yeah, and it can move, but very slowly. So, but usually that happens, and it carries all the structures with it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The structure becomes part of that, and then it just
because the structure's foundation is in the stuff that's being liquefied. So it either sinks the whole thing is moving, and yes, the structure goes.
Yeah, you're basically picturing,
and probably is going to shake completely apart.
Yeah,
as well.
True.
Yeah, you can have a very slow. Like I think this happened. Like going back to Easter Island, I think this happened on Easter Island because, people still get surprised at like, wow, the statues actually have whole bodies.
Right, yeah.
But you'll notice that most of them, not most of them, but a lot of them are buried up to their chins, and yet they're still upright, or they have these interesting tilts. But none of them are like laying down. Now, obviously, if they were laying down, they'd be under the sediment, and we can't see them. So maybe there are lots of them laying down, buried under 30 meters of material. But there's plenty of them that are still standing. They have these interesting tilts. The tilts always seem to be in the direction of material flow off the slope behind them. Okay, so that to me implies, and because the statues are kind of tall and narrow, so if it was a fast flow, it should just knock them down. But a very slow moving, slow like accumulation of material sliding off that mountain and slowly kind of going around them and burying them more and more, they will tilt very slowly and they will not fall over because enough material has accumulated around them to keep them from falling, even though some of them have a pretty extreme tilt. Right. So that can happen. But if it happens to a building made out of blocks, it's going to be a pile of rubble. It isn't going to be intact, because a building isn't like a statue. It isn't a single piece. So have monolithic structures, they may be able to survive intact, being slowly buried over the course of decades or a century. But if it's made out of blocks, it's gonna push one wall in, and then it's gonna fill the whole thing up with stuff, and then it's gonna push the other walls out, and you're gonna end up with a pile of blocks in mud. You're not gonna have a building anymore. Now I know, in some cases the argument is, they dig down, they find the remnants of this ancient structure. There's blocks all over the place. They're not totally damaged because it was like they were inundated with mud, but the foundation is still there, and they basically just rebuild the thing and then pretend that they made it. I've heard that argument. Some of it's interesting. I don't know, but to me, I'm like that stuff is fascinating. But the fact that it's only 200 years ago, I'm like, wow, it seems like people would remember this. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of writers.
Yeah. There's the difference in literacy and the ability to write things down in the 1800s versus when you go back 4,000 years when only scribes could write things down. And, it's a lot harder to find documentation from very long time ago, whereas in the 1800s there's tons of documents, and so I have to be able to say, well, everything that is telling you that those buildings were made back then is a lie. That's really tough for me to believe, but that doesn't mean
fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're all at different levels of how far out there we can get. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's good to ask these questions.
I'm all in on giant conspiracies, but that one I can't completely. I would be like, somebody would have uncovered me like actually they dug that courthouse out of the ground. Some rancher just wrote it down in his journal. It should, like somewhere somebody would say it.
Yeah,
hasn't been erased yet. I don't know.
Well, so, I'm hoping that some of my listeners will hear this and they'll have better points than I'm making, so that would spark up something else. Who knows?
I'm sure.
But
I can play devil's advocate on myself.
Ooh, nice.
So it's completely imaginable that some modern structures were discovered.
Yeah.
And then perhaps they were discovered in ruins and rebuilt and claimed like, yeah, we built this. Like but all of them, I doubt that. Mm-hmm. It is possible that, because there have definitely been ancient sites that have been discovered that were completely buried. And, even in modern times, we're discovering ancients. Like we just discovered like entire cities under the jungle. Mm-hmm. Right.
It's all foundations, right?
It's foundations and stuff. So the point is that, So somewhere they could have discovered some amazing foundation and a bunch of blocks and just like built something and been like, look what we built.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not given credit or not explained that it was an ancient site. And then the motive may very well have been that they didn't want to reveal that it was an ancient site because of, maybe people might claim it. So you just pretend like you just built it. And maybe another reason is that they're still discovering stuff and they don't want to let people know that they're discovering what they're discovering.
Treasure. Yeah.
A source of treasure. So yeah, I can come up with a number of reasons, but
and there are political ones too. The idea that you don't want to say that the people that were here before us were civilized.
That's what
absolutely
skating around that idea.
Yeah,
but the idea that this is broad in terms of like this is everything that we see. No, like come on,
right.
Just I would just temper it a little bit. Like it's possible that this did happen in some cases.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of co-opting that I see that powerful enterprises take part in.
Yeah,
they love to co-opt a good idea.
I feel like that this is, whether it's true or not, the interesting thing about it is the distrust that a lot of people have in the standard model story. That's what it points out to me, right? And so people are looking. They're
it's the same thing with Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, they have so little trust in the standard model story that they're willing to look at the 1800s and say there's a huge lie here too.
Everything is fake.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Or Fomenko, the now 1500 years has been added in or something like that.
Right. Yeah. And I don't want to compare. I feel like Flat Earth is part of that too. Like I'm not comparing mudflood or Tartaria people to flat earthers, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like that's also a product of just a huge distrust in the scientific establishment. It's whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It's so much when you're looking at it from a sociological standpoint of like, wow, look at all these people who are just like, I don't believe anything you say,
right.
Earth is flat and we can build any of this shit. Right. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting development.
To me it's sorry. Yeah. To me, it seems like good evidence for bad leadership, maybe, or something,
or too many times that, what were once respected institutions of science or academia or whatever have been caught up in some scandal or another where they were totally shown to be lying about one thing or another. And people now are just like, whatever, everything you guys are all paid off to say whatever it is that whoever your sponsors are want you to say.
And go ahead. Yeah, sorry, man.
Well, I'm in certain ways one of those people. Like I
don't trust them.
I don't trust a lot of these institutions.
Yeah.
And
I hear you.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be hard to get it back.
I know that you guys don't get political on your show, and I really respect that. And that's, I do sometimes, but for the most part, I like to keep my head in the ancient past because, like we were talking about before, we're looking at patterns. And to me, it's all up until today in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
So it's interesting to just follow the patterns rather than getting caught up in the current negative situation that might be going on. It's easier to just compare them to all the other things that people won't immediately yell at and run away from.
Yeah. We're okay talking about politics as long as it's 4,000 years old.
That's right.
Hell yeah. Well, we're going to wrap it up pretty much, but something to consider. I don't know if you guys have heard this about Tartaria and all the big cathedrals, that they're cathedrals. And I know you guys like electric universe theory.
What's that?
What's electric universe theory? Oh, let me get into it for you. This guy Velicott.
You talking about magnetic universe? Is that
yeah, cathedrals. Check that out. It's an interesting one. I don't know how viable it is, but it's fun.
That's great. Yeah, it took me a while to get it.
Well, guys, you guys, it's been a real honor to have you on. I've listened to you guys for years, and I think you're doing great work, and I really appreciate your show. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah,
for those who aren't familiar. Oh yeah. Yo.
Electric Universe, and I want to say something about it.
You say whatever you want, Kyle.
Basically, I'm sort of doing like this reverse trolling on our show all the time about Electric Universe. How do I explain this? I actually
It's
pick
a deep troll.
It's
Like, we're on
it's
the
a
Deep
real
Share
deep
podcast.
troll.
It's a deep
Yeah.
troll.
Nice.
I pick news stories a lot of times because the standard model scientists are finding aspects about the universe that point to the ideas in the electric universe theory, hypothesis, whatever.
Mhm.
And I find that very interesting because when I started looking into the electric universe, I was also kind of going in my own direction. In terms of, it all started with gravity and me looking into resonance and cymatics, doing experiments in the studio and with sound and seeing these patterns and thinking about all this. So I kind of come up with this whole idea. And then Russ was like, dude, you really need to look into the electric universe model because, like, I think, your ideas may merge pretty well with what these guys have going. So I did a deep dive on it, and I listened to everything that I could find from interviews and stuff while at work of Wal Thornhill. That led me to looking into Halton Arp. Fascinating stuff, really, really cool stuff. And I love the idea in terms of a fundamental, the basic idea that electromagnetism plays a much bigger role in what we observe in the cosmos than is given credit for, and that perhaps a lot of the effects that we assume are this very strange and mysterious force of gravity are actually effects of the electromagnetic resonance in the universe. I think that's really cool. I think it's the idea of these giant plasma forms stretching across galactic clusters and causing the arrangement of these large groups of mass in the universe is awesome. and that's like some of the stories that I found. It's like scientists discovered gigantic plasma arcs across the universe, and I'm just like,
Yeah,
wow.
They're like, well, scientists are baffled by these gigantic plasma forms.
And so on the podcast, I'm just like, man, I wish somebody would have, kind of come up with a model for this idea.
theory that
Teach me like a magnetic universe or
Yeah,
something.
maybe something like that.
Yeah.
Electro universe. Yeah.
These ideas are really cool. So that's really where I stand. But my problem with it is not a big problem, but just that I dug into it as far as I could, and then I'm like, okay, I can't seem to get any deeper into this without watching videos. And I wish that they would just, I know there's been a lot of criticism of the scientific, the scientific community in terms of peer review and, of course, everybody that tries to go step outside the boundaries gets slammed and slandered and destroyed and all that. Well, Graham Hancock did it. There are guys that do it and they get destroyed, but it doesn't matter if it's solid science. It's going to ultimately catch some people's eyes, and eventually, hopefully, it will prevail. That's what we have to deal with. So the idea that these guys are just going to make YouTube videos and not really do it in the fashion of traditional the scientific method, and their excuse is that that the peer review system is corrupt. Well, I don't know what to do with it then. I'm just going to hope that somebody will eventually do it
Yeah.
the right way, I guess.
Yeah, I agree, because I feel like even if you for everyone that submitted peer-reviewed papers 40, 50, whatever years ago that got shut down and shamed and all that. And we're still reading them. We're still, think about Velikovsky. Velikovsky was laughed out of existence pretty much, right? We're still reading them.
But Brett's papers are there.
Yeah.
So people like Randall Carlson can discover them and dive into them, and people like in the Comet Research Group can dive into all these papers and look at his data collection, look at his observations. That's the way to do it.
Absolutely. It has to be put up against scrutiny.
In 100 years, I will be surprised if there are going to be scientists watching a bunch of YouTube videos to try to figure out, to try to confirm some observations of electric universe.
Well, in a science of consensus, that's probably where it will go. So let's hope it doesn't go there.
That's
all
true.
right.
I'm going to get trashed for that. But anyway.
That's all right.
I'll just keep trolling.
Please do, especially the reverse troll. That's a fantastic tactic.
Fun.
All right, gentlemen, please, for anyone who's not familiar with you, please tell my audience where they can find you.
Brothersoftheserpent.com has all the podcast related stuff. It's got a bunch of interesting stuff there, including merchandise, or if you want to support us, but all the podcast episodes are there. We're also on YouTube. Every episode is there. And if you like to listen to podcasts through an RSS feed, we're basically anywhere you can find podcasts. We're on Spotify and everything else, any app you choose to use. Yeah, so that's it.
Don't email Russ about Electric Universe, because Brothers of the Serpent podcast or brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. That's his email.
Me, yeah. So don't if you're gonna write very angry emails at Kyle, I'm gonna be the one getting them.
Yeah, don't do that. If you want to email me, it's I love Electric Universe at
Excellent. Well, guys, it's been a real pleasure, man. I appreciate you guys coming on. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, man. Thank you.
All right, everybody, take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Deep Share Podcast. If you want to hear more, then hit that subscribe button. Follow me on all the social places. And remember, think for yourself, but don't always believe what you think. Till next time.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, that's hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone.
What do we know? What do we know? If I know what we know, then I can tell you what we know, and if someone else knows, okay?